My name is Marco Reyes-Fontaine. I am 31 years old, and on a Tuesday morning in October, I stood outside a glass-walled conference room on the 32nd floor of a downtown Dallas high-rise and watched my biological father walk off an elevator in a suit he couldn't quite afford, flanked by an attorney carrying a leather briefcase that still had the price sticker residue on the side handle. Reyes-Fontaine smiled at the receptionist. He always smiled at receptionists. He had a handshake for every man in the room and a sympathetic tilt of the head for every woman. He hadn't seen me in 17 years. When he finally turned and found me standing there, he opened his arms slightly, not quite a gesture, just an implication of one, and said, "Marco, you look good, son." I said nothing. I had been waiting for this day for 8 months. Not with rage. Not with dread. With documentation. What I haven't told you yet is what Ray didn't know when he walked into that room, and what Dominic Fontaine had spent the last 18 months of his life making absolutely certain of. If you've ever had someone walk back into your life only after there was something to take, you already know where this story goes emotionally. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from. If this hits close, subscribe before you keep going. Some of you won't be ready for the middle. Dominic Fontaine built his company the way men of his generation built everything, in the dark, before anyone was watching, with materials he sourced himself. Fontaine Commercial Construction started as a 3-man concrete crew working subdivision drainage projects in the late 1980s. By the time I came to live with him in 2009, it had grown into a 46-person firm with a client list that included 3 hospital systems, 2 municipal contracts, and a mixed-use development outside Frisco that would eventually be worth more than the company itself. The office smelled of cedar and blueprint paper, a combination I have never encountered anywhere else. There were 2 white boards in the conference room that Dominic refused to digitize because he said the erasure marks were part of the thinking. He wasn't sentimental about much, but he was sentimental about process. I was 16 when I started answering phones there on Saturdays. My mother, Elena Reyes, had died of a stroke 10 weeks before. She was 48 years old. She had been working double shifts at a medical billing company for 4 years. She had a collection of ceramic mugs she bought at garage sales, every one chipped somewhere, everyone used daily, and a photograph of a beach in Corpus Christi that she taped to the inside of her closet door. She never took me there. I think she was saving it. After the funeral, a small, damp Tuesday service at a church off Mockingbird Lane, a man I recognized by his posture more than his face walked up to me in the parking lot. I had met Dominic twice before, at Christmases when I was very young. He was wearing a dark suit and holding his hat in his hands. He said, "Pack what matters. You're coming with me." It was not a question. I did not treat it as one. His house in Lakewood was a modest ranch style that sat slightly lower than its neighbors, as though it had been pressed gently into the earth. The kitchen table was always set for 2, whether or not anyone was expected. The back porch had a view of a live oak that Dominic claimed was older than the city's incorporation, a claim I never verified because I didn't want to ruin it. He gave me his guest room. He enrolled me in school. He attended exactly one parent-teacher conference, during which my history teacher told him I was quiet but perceptive, and Dominic said, "That'll serve him better than you think." He never formally explained what I was to him. He just made room. On my first day as an intern, I was 19, studying finance at UT Dallas on a partial scholarship. Dominic set a hard hat on my desk without ceremony. It was scuffed and painted over at least 3 times, a faded red beneath a layer of blue beneath the current white. Every color was a different project era, different materials, different job site. "That's not a souvenir," he said. "You wear it." I wore it. There was a version of Dominic Fontaine that the industry knew, measured, deliberate, impossible to rush. Contractors who tried to push him on timelines reported back that he listened, nodded, and then simply repeated the original schedule without explanation. He was not cruel about it. He was just certain. The version I knew was something quieter. On Sunday mornings, he made coffee in a dented aluminum percolator he refused to replace and read the paper at the kitchen table, circling things without annotation, the way people do when they're clipping information for a future version of themselves. He kept a notepad beside the sugar bowl. I once saw him write the word patience on it and underline it 3 times, then turn the page. We talked about work the way other families talked about everything else. Did you see the Frisco margins? Run the numbers on the Plano bid before Thursday. What does the subcontractor think about the timeline? It was intimacy by proxy. Both of us were more comfortable saying what do the numbers tell us than most of the things that actually needed to be said. Once, in 2018, I sat across from him in his office after a particularly difficult week. A key project manager had left, a municipal contract had stalled, and I'd made a judgment call on a vendor dispute that cost us $30,000. I had my resignation letter drafted. I was 25. He looked at the letter for a long moment and then pushed it back across the desk without reading past the first line. The $30,000, he said. Was the vendor in the wrong? Yes, I said. Then you paid for the right thing. File it under tuition. He never mentioned it again. What I didn't understand then, what I couldn't have understood, was that he was already building something around me. Not just mentoring me. Not just employing me. Architecting a future in which I would be protected by the precision of his foresight in a way I hadn't been protected by anyone since my mother taped that photograph inside her closet door. In 2021, Dominic was diagnosed with ALS. He told me on a Wednesday between a project meeting and a lunch he skipped. He sat down across from me and said, "I've got something in my motor neurons. It's progressive. I don't want to discuss the timeline because I find timelines distracting. I want to discuss the business." I asked him what he needed. "Everything you've been doing," he said. "Just more of it." We went back to work. Reyes-Fontaine reappeared 8 months before Dominic died. He didn't call ahead. He showed up at the office on a Thursday afternoon with the particular confidence of someone who has told themselves a story so many times it's calcified into certainty. He was wearing a sport coat over a dress shirt, no tie, the collar slightly open, the aesthetic of a man performing the idea of casual authority. He shook hands with the receptionist. He looked around the office with a slow, proprietary scan that I recognized immediately and said nothing about. "I heard Dom's not well," he told me in the hallway. "I wanted to come see him. He's resting this afternoon," I said. "I'm family," Ray said. The words sat between us like something left on a surface too long. "I'll let him know you're here," I said. Dominic agreed to see him. Briefly. I was not in the room, but Dominic told me afterward in the precise, economical way he communicated everything. He wanted to know about the business structure. I told him the structure is fine. Over the following 3 months, Ray called Dominic twice. He attended one family dinner, Thanksgiving, at the Lakewood house, during which he spent 40 minutes talking about a real estate opportunity in Houston and asked 3 questions about Fontaine Construction's asset valuation. He brought wine. He told Carla, loudly enough to be heard, that he was so glad Dom had someone looking after him. I watched all of this from a careful distance. I had been running the financial operations of this company for 4 years. I knew our revenue, our liabilities, our contracts, our exposure. What Ray was doing was what people like Ray always do, establishing presence without substance, laying down enough footprint to point to later. He was building a trail. I didn't say anything to Dominic about it. I didn't need to. In March, 7 weeks before Dominic died, he asked me to come to Patricia Okafor's office downtown. I had met Patricia twice, once at a firm dinner, once when Dominic updated his will in 2020. She was a compact woman in her early 50s who organized information the way architects organize load-bearing walls. Nothing decorative, nothing redundant, everything precisely where it needed to be to hold something up. She handed me a folder. "Dominic asked me to walk you through this," she said. I opened it. I read the first page twice. Then I closed the folder and sat with it for a moment the way you sit with something when the shape of your entire history rearranges itself around a single fact. "He did this in 2016, I said. "June 14th, she confirmed. "I was 23, I said. "He wanted to wait until you were established," she said. His words. I did not say anything else for a while. The view from the 32nd floor showed a skyline that Dominic had, in some partial way, helped build. I looked at it for a long time. "There's more," Patricia said. "I want to pause here because I know some of you already feel what's coming, and some of you are still holding out hope that Reyes-Fontaine was going to be something different than what he was. Drop a comment right now. Did you see it coming? The legal filing, the dinner, the phone calls, when did you know? And if someone in your life has ever tried to establish presence right before something valuable was on the table, you know exactly what that felt like. I see you. Dominic died on a Saturday in April. I was with him. It was quiet. The live oak in the backyard was visible from his bedroom window, and the morning light was doing something specific and unhurried with the leaves that I don't have a precise word for. His breathing changed around 6 in the morning and then gradually stopped. I sat in the room for a while after. I did not cry. I have thought about that, turned it over more times than I can count, and I've come to understand that grief, for me, doesn't live in the moment of loss. It lives in the small, subsequent discoveries. The note in his handwriting on the kitchen notepad, the coffee percolator that no one should use but me, the hard hat on his desk with its layers of paint, each one a different era of a life I was only partially present for. Ray's attorney filed the claim 11 days later. I called Patricia from the parking garage of the office building. The fluorescent light above my car was flickering in the specific way that fluorescent lights flicker when they are about to fail, inconsistent, irritated, indifferent. I sat with the engine off for 20 minutes. Then I went upstairs. 4 or 5 days, Patricia and I worked through documentation with the focused, systematic efficiency that I had learned, probably from the man we were both trying to honor. We organized 18 months of financial records showing a 41% revenue increase under my direct leadership. We pulled 11 years of email correspondence between Dominic and various family members and attorneys, predating my arrival, establishing a documented estrangement from Ray that had nothing to do with me. Patricia also produced a document I had not seen before. It was dated 2009. Notarized. Witnessed. Reyes-Fontaine, in his own handwriting, had formally disclaimed any interest in Dominic's estate in exchange for a personal loan of $40,000. He had never repaid it. He kept this, I said. He kept everything, Patricia said. I thought about the notepad beside the sugar bowl, the circled newspaper clippings without annotation, the man who wrote patience and underlined it 3 times. He had been building this for years before I understood what he was building. The will reading was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Ray and Carla arrived 7 minutes early, which told me everything about how certain they were. Carla was wearing a dark blazer over a silk blouse, her hair arranged with the careful precision of someone who understood the optics of grief. She worked the room before it was technically a room, touching the arm of the paralegal, asking the receptionist about the view, performing the warm authority of a woman who expects to be treated as a principal. Ray shook Gary Phelps's hand and said something that made Gary laugh. Gary was Ray's attorney, mid-40s, polished shoes, a yellow legal pad with several pages already covered in notes. He had the specific confidence of someone who has won variations of this argument before. I sat at the far end of the table with Patricia on my left. I had not slept particularly well. I had made coffee at 5 in the morning in the aluminum percolator I had brought from Dominic's kitchen, and I had stood at the back window and looked at the live oak in the gray pre-dawn light and thought, with some precision, about what it means to be prepared. The hard hat was on my desk upstairs. Patricia opened her folder and began to read. The preamble was standard: date, jurisdiction, witnesses, declarations of sound mind and volition. Ray was watching her with the patient, slightly proprietary expression of a man listening for his name. Carla's hands were folded on the table. Her expression was open, composed, appropriately somber. Then Patricia said, on June 14th, 2016, Dominic Charles Fontaine legally adopted Marco Antonio Reyes-Fontaine, making him his sole heir under Texas law. The room went very quiet. Not the quiet of shock, exactly. The quiet of recalibration. The quiet of an entire operating system encountering input it was not designed for. Carla's expression didn't break. It shifted. A small, almost imperceptible reorganization of the muscles around her eyes, like a machine receiving an error message and beginning, silently, to reprocess. I have replayed that moment many times. It was the most honest thing I ever saw her face do. Gary Phelps stopped writing mid-sentence. Ray said nothing for a full 8 seconds. I counted. Patricia continued reading. When she reached the 2009 disclaimer document, Ray's own signature, Ray's own handwriting, witnessed and notarized and filed with the county, she read it with the same even cadence she'd used for everything else. No emphasis. No editorial. Just the words. Ray stood up. His voice, when it came, was not the voice he'd used at Thanksgiving. It was thinner. That was a different time. A different situation. Family is family. Patricia looked up from the document for the first time. "Mr. Fontaine," she said without inflection, "you made your position on that quite clear in writing." Gary Phelps set his pen down on the yellow legal pad. He closed it. He said, quietly to no one in particular, "I need to make a call." He left the room and did not come back. At this point, Gary Phelps has just walked out of a will reading. Tell me in the comments, what do you think he knew, and when do you think he knew it? And what would you have done if you were sitting in that room? The aftermath is where this story gets complicated. Because Ray didn't go quietly. And Carla made one more move. Gary Phelps withdrew from the case before close of business that Thursday, citing a conflict of interest he described as one he had failed to identify earlier. Patricia later filed a bar complaint. The formal censure took 4 months to arrive. I never asked her to pursue it. She did it because it was the right thing, and because she was the kind of person who did right things procedurally, without announcement. Ray hired a second attorney within the week. The second attorney sent one letter, reviewed the 2009 disclaimer and the adoption documentation, and did not send a second letter. The legal claim dissolved the way bad arguments dissolve when they meet sufficient documentation, not with drama, but with a kind of quiet structural failure, like a wall that was never load-bearing. Carla's move came 12 days later. It arrived as an email. The subject line was, "Healing together for the family's sake." I read it twice at my desk, standing, with my coffee going cold beside me. The email was 4 paragraphs. It began with an acknowledgement of difficult emotions on all sides. It proceeded to a reflection on what Dominic would have truly wanted for his family's legacy. It suggested a conversation about honoring that legacy together. It ended with an expression of hope that Marco might find it in his heart to consider a relationship with the Fontaine side of the family going forward. Every sentence was engineered. Every paragraph performed a different function. I recognized the architecture of it the way you recognize a building type before you read the signage. I wrote back 4 sentences. I said I had received her message. I said I wished her, and Ray well. I said I would not be pursuing further contact. I said I hoped she understood. I hit send. I closed the email window. I went back to the Frisco development projections. The unexpected thing, the thing I had not prepared for, was Nadia. Nadia Cruz Fontaine was Ray's daughter from his first marriage. My half-sister, technically. We had met 3 times in our lives. Twice at family events when I was a child, once at Thanksgiving when Ray reappeared. She had said almost nothing at that dinner. I had noticed her watching Ray the way you watch something you've already understood, but haven't yet decided how to name. Her letter arrived by mail. Actual mail. On paper, in an envelope, with a stamp. It was handwritten. 3 pages. It contained no requests. It was an account of the night Ray left Dallas, not as she'd been told it, but as she had witnessed it at age 12, standing in a hallway in their Houston apartment, listening to her father on the phone make arrangements that made clear he had been making them for some time. She described what she saw. She described what she felt. She did not ask me to forgive anyone, including herself. She said only that she had wanted someone in the family to know what had actually happened, and that she thought I deserved that. I read it 3 times. I sat with it the way you sit with something true. I called Nadia on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the letter arrived. She answered on the second ring. There was a pause, the kind that happens when 2 people are both waiting to see if the other one will set the terms. I said, "I got your letter." She said, "I wasn't sure you'd call." "I wasn't sure either," I said. Another pause. Shorter. "I'm not calling to assign anything," I said. "Or to figure out what we're supposed to be to each other. I just wanted you to know I read it." She said, "That's enough." We talked for 40 minutes. About our mothers. About the particular texture of growing up adjacent to Ray Fontaine, close enough to understand him, far enough to eventually see him clearly. She was careful in the way that people are careful when they've been burned by honesty before. I was careful in the way that I am always careful, which is to say I measured everything before I said it, and probably still said less than I should have. Before we hung up, she said, "He told Carla the adoption was forged. He said you had manipulated a dying man. He believed it. Or he told himself he did. I've never been sure which." I thought about that for a moment. I think, I said finally, that the difference stopped mattering to him a long time ago. She was quiet. "Yeah," she said. "That's exactly it. We didn't talk about Ray again that call. Or the next one." 1 year later, in October, I sat at Dominic's desk, my desk, at 6:15 in the morning, before the office filled, with coffee from the aluminum percolator and the particular pre-dawn quiet of a building that is not yet itself. The hard hat was on the corner of the desk. It had been there since I moved in. I hadn't touched it. I'd thought about putting it somewhere else, a shelf, a cabinet, somewhere that felt more like preservation and less like a conversation with something that couldn't talk back. But every time I considered it, I didn't. It belonged on the desk. Dominic had said so, in the way he said most important things, without saying them directly at all. The Fontaine STEM Build Scholarship had awarded its first 4 grants that fall. First-generation construction management students. 2 in Dallas, 1 in Fort Worth, 1 in El Paso. I had written personal notes to each of them. Short notes. Practical ones. The kind that say, "Here is what the money is for, and here is what I hope you do with the rest." Nadia and I had spoken 3 times since the first call. Careful conversations. Surface level, in the best sense. The kind where you're testing the ice without pretending you're not. I didn't know if it became more than that. I had decided, deliberately and with some effort, that I didn't need to know yet. Some things deserve to develop at their own pace, without pressure from either direction. The Frisco development was on track to deliver in March. We were 6% under budget. I had not spoken to Reyes-Fontaine since the conference room. I had thought about him, though, less than I expected to. Mostly in the specific way you think about a structural error in a completed building, not with resentment, but with a kind of professional notation. That load was never distributed correctly. It held anyway. The live oak at the Lakewood house, Dominic's house, which I kept because it had a kitchen table set for 2 and a back porch that deserved to still be used, was beginning to lose leaves in the particular slow, unbothered way of old trees. I had sat on that porch the previous Sunday with coffee and a project file and had worked until the light went. It was enough. I've thought a lot about what people mean when they talk about family. They usually mean biology. They mean presence. They mean the people who showed up, even if showing up was complicated, even if it came with conditions you had to spend years untangling. What I know now is that family, in its most durable form, is an act of construction. It's the decision to show up in a parking lot after a funeral and say pack what matters. It's the patient accumulation of documentation, not as evidence against someone, but as evidence for something. It's the 11 years of emails. The 2009 letter. The adoption on a Tuesday in June, filed quietly, without ceremony, by a man who decided what he believed about a 23-year-old and then built the legal architecture to make that belief permanent. Dominic Fontaine never gave me a speech. He didn't do speeches. He gave me a scuffed hard hat with 3 colors underneath the white. He gave me a desk. He gave me a name that I had to earn and, eventually, understood I already had. If you've ever had to prove that something was yours, that the life you built, the relationships you chose, the person you became wasn't something you stumbled into, but something you constructed carefully over years, then you already understand what this story is actually about. It's not about Ray. It was never about Ray. Leave a comment below if you've ever had someone come back around once there was something to take. If this story resonated, share it. Someone in your life probably needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more. I'll be back.